The phone rang at 3:17 a.m. Not my ringtone. Not the one reserved for family. The flat, official vibration that means something has already gone wrong. I stared at it for a moment before answering, already awake, already counting the hairline crack that ran from the corner of the ceiling fan to the smoke detector. I'd counted it before. 23 inches, if you followed the curve. Hello. A woman's voice. Professional. Careful. May I confirm, are you Daniel Rowe? She said it like a question she didn't expect to be answered. Yes. A pause. Papers shuffling. Distant sounds behind her, groans, metal rails shifting, someone retching. Sounds that didn't belong to the quiet apartment I was sitting in. Sir, I'm calling from Riverside General Hospital. Your wife has been admitted. My chest didn't tighten. My pulse didn't jump. I waited. And 3 other individuals were admitted at the same time, she continued. All presenting similar symptoms. Severe abdominal distress. Fever. Disorientation. I closed my eyes. 4 people. Same night. Same symptoms. I smiled before I understood why. Are they stable? I asked. Another pause. She repeated my name again, like she needed to anchor herself to something real. They're being monitored. I'll be there shortly, I said, and hung up. I didn't rush. I didn't dress in a panic. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, hands resting on my knees, breathing evenly. 2 weeks earlier, my wife had finally stopped pretending. Her name was Lena. She used to be warm in public and sharp in private. The kind of woman people described as intense because it sounded better than cruel when bored. We were in the kitchen when it happened. No argument. No build-up. Just truth, dropped like a glass on tile. If you can't handle me sleeping with your friends, she said, folding her arms, then you should leave. Her tone wasn't angry. It was instructional. I remember noticing strange details. The hum of the refrigerator. A drop of coffee. Drying on the counter. How calm my body felt, like it had stepped outside itself. I looked at her. Really looked. With which friends? I asked. She laughed. Not nervous laughter. Not defensive laughter. Amused. Like I'd asked something adorable. All of them, she said. God, Daniel. You really are slow. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. Not denial. Denial is loud. It argues. It bargains. This was silence. That night, she slept easily beside me. Her breathing deep and steady, one arm flung across my chest like ownership. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and counted the crack again. The next morning, I made her coffee. 2 sugars, just how she liked it. I kissed her cheek. Asked about her schedule. She smiled, already bored with me again. Inside, something rearranged itself. I started noticing patterns. Group messages that went silent when I walked into the room. Dinners I was forgotten to be invited to. The way my friends, Mark, Evan, Lucas, suddenly found the floor fascinating when I spoke. Guilt has weight. It bends posture. Avoids eyes. I didn't accuse. Accusations make people defensive. Defensive people lie better. I observed. Phones don't lie. People do. While Lena showered, I synced backups she forgot existed. Old cloud accounts. Location history she didn't bother turning off because she thought I was harmless. Thursday nights. Same hotel. Same window of time. The symmetry was almost impressive. They weren't reckless. That hurt more than if they had been. They were careful. Organized. They rotated. Used different apps. Left phones in cars. Men I'd loaned money to. Men I'd defended when others doubted them. Men I'd called brothers. I didn't confront them. I invited them over. Barbecue. Beer. Laughter that felt like static. I stood at the grill while they joked behind me, flipping meat with hands that didn't shake. Lena smiled like she'd won something. She thought my silence was weakness. She was wrong. Planning doesn't require rage. It requires patience. The first results came quietly. Not from a doctor. From a lab report printed on plain white paper. Numbers and conclusions I didn't fully care about, only the final line. That was enough. Lena trusted things blindly. Trends. Wellness fads. Anything labeled natural. She never read details. Never questioned sources. I handed her the report one evening. She skimmed it. Scoffed. "You think this scares me," she said. I met her eyes. "No," I replied calmly. "I think it explains you." Something flickered across her face then. Not fear. Recognition. That night, they celebrated something. I wasn't invited to know what. They drank heavily. Toasted loudly. By morning, they were screaming. By noon, they were admitted. And by 3:17 a.m., the hospital was calling me like they didn't quite believe I existed. I arrived last. Clean. Calm. Composed. They lay in separate beds, pale and shaking. Tubes. Monitors. The room smelled like antiseptic and panic. When the doctor entered, a tired man with honest eyes, he spoke slowly. "This is difficult to say," he told them. "But you're all experiencing the same acute reaction. Same exposure window." Their heads turned toward me. Lena tried to speak. Nothing came out. I stepped closer, leaned down just enough that only she could hear. "As you wished," I whispered. And for the first time since I married her, she looked at me like she didn't know who I was. The room felt smaller once the doctor left. Not physically, emotionally. Like the walls had leaned in to listen. Machines hummed. Fluids dripped. Someone down the hall laughed too loudly, the sound echoing wrong in a place built for fear. The three men avoided each other's eyes now. Whatever loyalty they'd shared had collapsed under the weight of shared consequence. Lena finally found her voice. "You planned this?" she asked. Her words were hoarse, stripped of their usual sharpness. No insult wrapped inside them. Just disbelief. I didn't answer right away. I set the folder on the tray table instead. Paper against plastic. Soft. Final. Inside were timelines. Messages. Dates that lined up too perfectly to argue with. Nothing dramatic. Just truth, stacked neatly. "Yes," I said eventually. I planned for clarity. Mark, who used to call me every Sunday, started crying. Full, broken sobs. Evan stared at the ceiling like it might offer forgiveness. Lucas tried to sit up and failed. "I never touched you," I added, my voice steady. "I never forced anything." I didn't lie. I looked at Lena. "You did." She reached for my hand out of habit. Muscle memory. I stepped back. That was the moment it landed. Not that she'd been caught. Not that people would find out. But that whatever power she thought she held over me was gone. The nurse came in. Then another. Instructions. Monitoring. Reassurances that sounded more like formalities. I listened politely, nodded when expected, then excused myself. In the hallway, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. I felt empty. Not relieved. Not satisfied. Just finished. Divorce was faster than I expected. Evidence doesn't shout. It doesn't dramatize. It just sits there until someone has to acknowledge it. Lena didn't fight much. There were no tearful apologies, no promises to change. Pride doesn't allow for that kind of humility. The filing was public. Clean. Precise. I made no statements. I didn't need to. Rumors are hungrier than facts. They spread faster when they're not fed. People filled in the blanks themselves, and they were never kind. The three men recovered physically within weeks. Socially, they never did. One moved away quietly. Another tried to explain himself at work and only made things worse. The third kept posting motivational quotes online like they were armor. None of them contacted me again. Lena sent one message, months later. I didn't think you had it in you. I never replied. I moved cities. Smaller place. Fewer people. Quieter nights. The silence was different there. Not heavy. Just honest. At first, I missed the noise, arguments, laughter, the illusion of belonging. Then I realized how much effort it had taken to maintain that illusion. How tired I'd been without knowing it. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the man I was before. The one who believed loyalty had to be loud to be real. The one who mistook patience for weakness. The one who thought love was proven by endurance. I don't miss him. Betrayal doesn't always break you. Sometimes, it teaches you where your boundaries actually are. Where to stop bending. Where silence is stronger than screaming. I didn't win. I simply stopped losing. Time doesn't heal the way people say it does. It doesn't erase. It doesn't soften edges out of kindness. It just puts space between you and the memory, enough room to breathe without bumping into it every day. In the new city, no one knew my name. No one knew my past. I liked it that way. I rented a small apartment above a bookstore. Old floors that creaked when I walked, windows that rattled when it rained. The owner was an elderly woman who asked no questions and accepted rent in exact change. Some mornings, I helped her carry boxes. Some evenings, I sat on the steps and watched people live lives that had nothing to do with mine. I learned what quiet actually sounds like. It isn't empty. It's honest. There were nights when memories tried to creep back in. Not the betrayal itself, that part had dulled, but the confusion that came before it. The self-doubt. The wondering how long I'd been last in my own marriage. That's the damage people don't talk about. Not the act, but the rewriting of reality. When you start questioning your instincts. When you apologize for things you didn't do. I stopped doing that. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. Stopped chasing closure from those who only offered excuses. Stopped believing that being kind meant being available. Once, at a cafe, I overheard someone laughing in a way that sounded exactly like Lena. My body reacted before my mind could. Heart quickened. Muscles tensed. Then I turned and saw a stranger. And just like that, the moment passed. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. Months later, I ran into Mark by accident. Different city. Different street. Same posture, shoulders slightly hunched, like he was still bracing for impact. He recognized me instantly. We stood there, two men who used to share meals, now sharing nothing but a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed he meant it. But I also knew it didn't change anything. "I know," I replied. And I walked away. No speeches. No forgiveness seen. Just boundaries. That was the real victory. People assume strength looks like confrontation. Like shouting truth into someone's face and demanding acknowledgement. Sometimes strength is quieter. Sometimes it's choosing not to reopen doors just to prove you can slam them. I didn't rebuild my life dramatically. No grand transformation. No revenge glow-up. Just steady, deliberate steps toward something that didn't hurt. New routines. New habits. New people who knew me only as I was, not as I'd been used. And that was enough. If there's anything I learned, it's this. Betrayal doesn't define you unless you let it. Silence can be a response. Walking away can be an answer. And peace, real peace, comes when you stop needing others to understand what they've done. I don't tell this story often. But when I do, it's not to warn people. It's to remind them. Pay attention to what your calm is telling you. Trust the moment when things go quiet inside. That's not weakness. That's clarity. People think marriages end with shouting. Ours didn't. It ended slowly, quietly, long before the truth ever spoke its name. When I look back now, I can see the early fractures. The way Lena listened less and less, how conversations turned into performances. She didn't argue, she dismissed. If I was hurt, I was dramatic. If I asked questions, I was insecure. I learned to phrase concerns like jokes. To soften my voice. To lower my expectations so they wouldn't look like demands. That's how erosion works. Not with force, but repetition. She liked admiration more than intimacy. Compliments from strangers mattered more than commitment from me. I mistook that hunger for confidence. I defended her to friends who warned me gently, kindly. She just needs space, I'd say. What she needed was an audience. The first time she came home late and didn't explain, I told myself it wasn't my business. The second time, I convinced myself I was being mature. By the third time, I trained myself not to ask. That's how people disappear from their own relationships, one compromise at a time. She didn't hide everything. She didn't need to. She hid just enough. And I helped her, unknowingly. I trusted. I believed history counted for more than behavior. I believed love was something you proved by staying. I was wrong. After the hospital, after the paperwork, after the silence settled, I replayed conversations like crime scenes. Not to punish myself, but to understand. There were moments she tested me. Small confessions disguised as jokes. Provocations meant to measure how much I'd tolerate. Each time I stayed calm, she pushed further. Not because she hated me. Because she no longer respected me. That realization hurt more than the betrayal. Love can survive mistakes. It cannot survive contempt. News doesn't travel fast. It seeps. At first, nothing seemed different. The city kept moving. People went to work, ordered food, laughed too loudly at bars. For a few days, it felt like maybe this would all dissolve quietly. Like the truth might lose interest and wander off. It didn't. Someone always talks. Someone always frames it wrong. Someone always adds just enough fiction to make it entertaining. The story spread in fragments. A hospital admission involving multiple people. A marriage that ended abruptly. 3 friendships that collapsed. Overnight. People filled in the blanks with their own imaginations, and somehow, the truth still came out uglier than anything I could have said myself. At work, conversations stopped when I entered rooms. Not because people thought I was dangerous, but because they didn't know what version of sympathy to offer. Some avoided me entirely. Others tried too hard. I heard, "If you ever want to talk." I didn't. Talking wasn't healing. Talking was reopening. Lena tried to control the narrative at first. She always had. Casual remarks. Carefully worded confessions that painted her as misunderstood rather than unfaithful. It didn't work. Patterns are louder than excuses. And when 3 men tell slightly different versions of the same lie, people notice. One afternoon, I overheard 2 coworkers whispering near the elevators. She really thought he wouldn't do anything. Yeah, turns out quiet doesn't mean harmless. I didn't correct them. I wasn't harmless. I was done. The hardest part wasn't public opinion. It was the private moments, the sudden absence of people I'd once relied on. Friends who didn't choose sides so much as disappear entirely, unwilling to stand too close to something messy. That hurt more than I expected. Betrayal narrows your world. Not all at once. Slowly. Until you realize your phone hasn't buzzed in days. Loneliness crept in sideways. Late at night. During meals meant for 2. While folding laundry that still smelled faintly like someone who no longer belonged there. I didn't drink much then. Didn't want to blur anything. I needed to feel it fully, cleanly, so it wouldn't linger unfinished. Lena moved out first. She packed fast. Efficient. No dramatic pauses. No final arguments. Just the sound of drawers opening and closing, like punctuation marks on a sentence already finished. At the door, she hesitated. "You didn't have to ruin everything," she said. I looked at her. "You ruined it," I replied. "I just stopped pretending." She waited for more. An apology. A crack. Something that suggested I still needed her approval. I closed the door instead. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The three men tried to rebuild their lives in parallel, but consequences have gravity. Wherever they went, the story followed. Not loudly. Just enough. Invitations stopped coming. Trust dried up. People don't like men who can justify betrayal so cleanly. It suggests a flexibility they don't want near their own lives. I heard updates through second-hand channels. New jobs. New cities. Fresh starts that never quite took. None of it made me happy. But it made sense. Eventually, the whispers faded. Scandals age quickly. There's always something newer, louder, more shocking. What remained was quieter. Me. I sold the apartment. Gave away furniture that held too many memories. Took only what felt neutral. Useful. When I drove out of the city for the last time, I didn't look back. Not because I was strong. Because there was nothing left to see. Leaving didn't feel dramatic. There was no last look in the rearview mirror, no swelling music moment where everything suddenly made sense. The city slipped away the same way it had entered my life years earlier, gradually, without ceremony. I crossed the state line just after sunrise. The sky was pale, undecided. That hour when the world hasn't committed to the day yet. I liked driving then. Fewer cars. Fewer expectations. Just road and movement and the hum of tires reminding me I was still going somewhere. For a long time, I didn't know where somewhere was. I ended up in a town that didn't advertise itself. No skyline. No slogans painted on welcome signs. Just brick buildings, narrow streets, and people who nodded politely without curiosity. I took that as a kindness. I found work easily enough. Nothing impressive. Nothing tied to my past. A job where results mattered more than personality, where no one asked personal questions unless you offered answers first. At night, I cooked. For one. That was harder than I expected. Not because I missed her, but because habits linger after meaning is gone. I still set 2 plates sometimes. Still reached for ingredients she liked before remembering I didn't need to accommodate anyone anymore. Grief doesn't always announce itself as sadness. Sometimes it shows up as muscle memory. I let it pass. Weeks turned into months. Months settled into routine. I learned which grocery store stocked bread that didn't taste like cardboard. Which cafe stayed open late enough for people who preferred thinking to sleeping. Which bench in the park caught the afternoon sun without attracting conversation. I became someone who noticed things again. That surprised me. For years, my attention had been wrapped around managing someone else's moods, anticipating shifts, smoothing over moments before they became problems. Without that constant vigilance, my mind had space. I read more. Walked more. Thought less about what people thought of me. And slowly, without effort, something loosened. One evening, a woman sat across from me at the cafe and asked if she could share my table. It was crowded. I said yes. We talked. About nothing important. Books. Weather. The strange comfort of routines. When she asked if I was married, I said no. Not divorced. Not separated. Just no. And it felt honest. I didn't rush into anything after that. I didn't need to. I wasn't trying to replace what I'd lost. I was learning what it meant not to fill silence just to prove I wasn't alone. There's a difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness demands distraction. Solitude offers clarity. I chose clarity. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think back to the hospital room. To the moment Lena looked at me and realized she no longer knew me. People imagine that moment as revenge. As triumph. It wasn't. It was recognition. She saw, for the first time, that I had an interior life she'd never bothered to understand. That my calm wasn't emptiness. That my patience wasn't permission. That realization unsettled her more than anger ever could. I didn't hate her. Hate requires ongoing investment. I'd withdrawn mine. I don't tell people this story to sound clever or controlled. I tell it because I used to believe something dangerous, that endurance was the same as strength. It isn't. Strength is knowing when something has already ended and refusing to pretend otherwise. Strength is leaving before bitterness becomes your personality. Strength is choosing yourself without needing the other person to agree. Betrayal didn't make me harder. It made me clearer. Clear about what I accept. Clear about what I give. Clear about the cost of silence and the power of it. Some people mistake kindness for compliance. Some mistake quiet for absence. They're wrong. Quiet people notice everything. They remember. They decide. And when they walk away, they don't do it loudly. They just don't come back. This is where the story ends. How was today's story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and where you're watching from. Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.